You're listening to the So Tell Us podcast.
With David Feinberg and Jared McCallie. How was that, David? Okay, hey. Welcome back to So Tell Us podcast. I'm Jared McCallie.
I'm David Feinberg.
That's David Feinberg. We have a hell of a guest today. He's a real get.
Natural.
Yeah,
God.
so natural. He was named New York City's fastest rising comic at the 2019 New York City Comedy Festival. He's recently been opening for Tim Dillon. He's a regular at Caroline's on Broadway. And the biggest one to us, true to our heart, the winner of 2019's Philly's Funniest Competition. Please welcome Jamie Wolfe.
Hey. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for being here, Jamie.
Jamie, where are you right now?
I am in New Jersey. I'm at my girlfriend's grandparents' place right now.
Jesus
We're quarantining
Christ.
here. I had to move out of my place in New York. Can't really afford that anymore. And I'm just in New Jersey now, in a wasteland. I don't know what's gonna happen. I might have to move back to my mom's house again. It's kind of scary.
Then now you're just going to be the greatest comic in Philadelphia with those accolades.
Yeah, my God.
If there's any comedy in Philadelphia to do.
It'll come back.
That's true. I don't know. This could be spell the end of it for all of us, I think. I don't need to get too negative right from the jump, but I do think that this might be the end of all of our hobbies and or careers.
Yeah.
Depending on who you're asking. I was saying that I hope that because our non-visual listener might that doesn't mean our blind listeners. I mean the non-visual listener. They can't see that the paintings, Jamie, that you have behind you are like two paintings that it's obvious that like a couple who's been married for 60 years couldn't decide where to put. Like there's one very big one and one a lot smaller one, and God, I hope your girlfriend.
Like, just put it in the office. Just put it in the office. I'm done with this.
Swear to fucking God, I should have thrown you down the stairs that night in Mankato. Ugh.
They also couldn't be too different of paintings to be right next to it.
True.
Oh my God! Yes. The themes.
One is a crowded street. One is a crowded street, and the other is like in the Mojave Desert, basically.
Yeah. But they're both. Is your girlfriend or her grandparents Jewish or anything like that?
Yep.
Because I was going to say these two paintings, they look like paintings that each one of them does not depict Israel, but has a story about how it's somehow connected to Israel. Okay, this is Israel today, a shining example of a country, and this is ancient Israel, a land that we still hold connection to.
Israel, it used to be just a cave. Now there's people there. Like, what? I don't think that's true. Yeah, it was just a cave.
No, it was. The Jews, they came there and there was nothing. It was a parking lot, like it's a Bloomingdale's. And now it's everything.
You've heard of Two Ferns. Welcome to my new show, Between Two Menches.
All right, I'll try to get us a little bit on track with this. I'm sorry I've thrown us off.
This is just going off the rails.
We just do that bit for a whole hour, and then we're like, all right, we're done. That's the podcast.
The outro music comes in. Jamie and I are in the background, like, doing a full fucking dance. We normally do like to start off with a vaguely anti-Semitic joke, and then we like to ask a little bit about like a who, what, where kind of a question, like who are you when it comes to comedy? Where is it that you live? And then in the what, we ask like, what made you start? Like, what's your jump off point with that?
That's good. So who are you in terms of what?
Who are you in terms of, I mean, let's talk about defining yourself. I suppose we could jump into it that way. Like,
We're getting so general. We're like, okay, well, identity. It's basically how you see yourself in the world.
what are the optics on you? Let's
is
talk a little.
your comedy? That's just the
Okay.
oh, so no, that's just the someone in your family. Like, explain your comedy to me.
Oh my God!
What are you doing up there?
The annoying cornering at a party. Yeah.
Oh,
like
okay.
yeah, like I would describe myself. I often say just overall just comedian because stand-up, sketch, improv. But I don't know. Do you have a corner that you paint yourself into? Do you have something? Because we've seen you do a lot of different stuff. But where do you put yourself on that map?
Yeah, I'm a stand-up comedian. That's what I would say. That's my main like focus and passion. But I also actually really enjoy like writing sketches and just writing in general actually is very enjoyable and brings a lot of like the same satisfaction that stand-up does. But I'd say I'm a stand-up comedian first and foremost, for sure.
Mm.
Do you so being a stand-up though, like, did this originate from anywhere? Like, is there a reason that you're a stand-up? Was like, did you have a funny dad or a horrible childhood or something?
Funny dad.
Or a horrible dad and a funny childhood.
Horrible dad. I don't know how those two go together. A horrible dad and a funny child.
I don't know. You got thrown down the stairs, but there's a banana peel.
I was gonna say, exactly. I think I had a bad childhood for sure, and not a good dad, and those two help. But it was more, I think, where it came from for me, and also actually probably for Tyler, is that we're both in the middle of our family. So we have our older brother who's like 2 years older than Tyler, 6 years older than me. And then my sister, who we're twins, but she's always been like the younger one, who like everyone kind of babied and took care of. So when you're in the middle child, you're kind of like mediating disputes as opposed to like being one of the big forces. Cause it was basically the baby versus the older brother a lot of the time. And then me and Tyler would be like the comedic relief trying to stop the fights from happening.
Oh. Yeah,
like,
that was the elephant in the room there. We were going to mention your brother.
Yeah.
Jamie's brother's also a comic, Tyler Wolfe, who's really funny. When I started in the Philly scene, your brother was the nicest person to me. He is like, that was going to be horrible to say off stage. He's hilarious. No, he is so funny. Like, just as a person, like as you're explaining, like the comedic relief, like he is like on it. He's fast. Yeah.
Yeah, he's the best. He's the best. I just saw him last night. I was in Philly, and it's like that's where it comes from. Is we were having dinner, and I remembered back when we were growing up, we would always have dinner with the whole family. And Reese, my oldest brother, would be like yelling or like throwing a tantrum or whatever. And my younger sister would be crying, and my mom would just be sitting there eating. And then me and Tyler had to like make it fun, like try and lighten the mood a little bit. So we would always crack jokes and do impressions, that was how we did it. And I think that both like the need for attention that you didn't get, and then also the need to like kind of lighten the mood and sort of like just stop the conflict from happening, It's like a peacemaker role, I think, is kind of the comedian in childhood. And that manifested itself in like when I was 17, I wanted to start. I was like, okay, I should try comedy. That's probably the best place.
I can imagine you two, because he's told me some stuff. Like, I actually want to get into that because you mentioned childhood, but I can just imagine you two at the dinner, like, Knish, I thought it was dog food. I don't know what you guys would say.
Yeah, it's crazy. You mentioned dog food. Tyler, when he was like 5 years old, maybe 6 or 7. I obviously wasn't born yet, or maybe I was 1. I don't remember it. But my mom told me he wanted to eat like a dog. So when they had dinner, she would put his bowl on the ground and he would eat out of it like a dog.
I like that you immediately put it as his bowl, as if the transition point into this was like, and he had his bowl, of course. So you just put it on the ground.
That's a given. We all have our bowl.
The transition point is not, when your mom's feeding you like a dog, and all right, this is our therapy podcast. So don't ever tell anyone podcast.
Well, wait. So hold on. A last thing about that. It's so crazy you mentioned food because this all works together in your childhood.
Yeah.
Your brother told me that one time you were eating this is so dumb, this story that he's like, this is perfect, but it worked so perfect. It's like, a young Jamie was eating a peanut butter and sandwich. Yes, just plain peanut butter. He takes a few bites and looks at my mom and says, "Mom, I don't like this. This isn't the normal peanut butter we usually use." She said, "Jamie, yes, it is. We eat this kind every day." He said, "We eat crunchy peanut butter?" My mom was confused. She never buys crunchy peanut butter. She goes over to open the sandwich and discover that Jamie's tooth had fallen out into the sandwich and was eating.
I was chewing and swallowing my own tooth.
Oh God.
David, you look traumatized from that.
It's like we're doing a Nardwar interview, but there's two of us, and I didn't know that story. My God, it's terrifying.
Surprise.
That is the interesting thing, is talking about, and I wonder if we could jump into this a little bit about comedic philosophy, because it's interesting to talk about having two comedians that have been in the same household, and it seems like you draw a lot of influence from this, but in terms of your comedic philosophy and Tyler's comedic philosophy, do you feel like there are points where you guys really do mesh very well? Because I feel like we do see that on stage sometimes.
Yeah.
Let's talk about points of similarities and points of difference.
Yeah, I think a lot of similarities. We have bits that are similar in theme, I think, at certain points. We both talk about like race a good amount on stage. We do a lot. I think this is the biggest one. We both are pretty adept and good at crowd work, talking to the audience and kind of reacting to things that are happening in the moment when we're on stage. I think we're both pretty good at that. I think another thing we have in common is our work ethic. We both believe that it's just a function of how much work you put into it, how good you are, how funny you are. And obviously we're in different scenes, so he's limited in Philly, but in New York, you're not really limited to, like, you can just do as many sets as you want to do on any given day. It's literally like, if you want to do 9 sets in a day, I've done 9 sets in a day before. So it's more about just what you put into it. And that's kind of where we agree the most. We're both just like, if you put in the work, you're going to get better on stage. As long as you're funny in the first place, it's never a given, but
his work ethic is amazing. I remember one time he was doing a joke and I just gave him like a tag or to change a word or something like that. And he was like, "That's really good. I like that. I want to do that. But I have like 3 sets where I want to do it like this, and then I'll try it this other way."
Yeah, exactly.
I was like, that's pretty crazy, like, to see, like so that's awesome to hear.
It's all. Go ahead, David.
No, sorry, Jamie, please. I don't want to cut you off.
No, I think you're right. That's what it's about, is we both approach it less as like, we're both passionate about it, but it's less of like a passion to us, and it's more of like it's like a job. It's a job. If you want it to be your job, they say you got to treat it like a job. So I always feel like it does take some of the, like, starry-eyed, like dream-like quality to it. It's not a dream anymore. I'm just looking at it as like, this is the work I do, and my job is to make a joke as funny as it has to be, or as funny as it can be. And that's not really, it takes a lot of the like mysticism out of like comedy. You think it's like, oh, it's just that guy is so funny, just gets on stage and talks, and a lot of people think you don't even plan stand-up, but it's not. It's like very, very much about just grinding it out, just making the joke as good, and taking out every word that doesn't add to the joke, and every line is a setup or a punchline. It's about like, it's really like sharpening a blade in a lot of ways. We both have that.
Knowing the beats and counting, things like that, like knowing a pause and things like that. It's
really,
yeah.
Well, then in the same vein, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, I mean, obviously, I think that it speaks for all of us, but especially for you. I mean, could you tell us a little bit about that sort of comedic journey? Because I know that for a lot of people, it is this like shedding of layers in terms of their awareness of how this kind of thing works. Could you talk about the level that you're on right now, and then some of the levels that you've felt before this in terms of your awareness of comedy?
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, the hard thing is I was on a level before Corona hit. And then as soon as Corona hit, the problem with stand-up is like, you were talking, Jared, about like the pauses are so vital to hit it, to making a joke hit. And I don't think I can really get to that same place I was at before, right? Like if I were to do a set right now, I would probably bomb no matter what. Even if it's the best, hottest room of all time, I would bomb, because it's about that. It's more of a muscle than like riding a bike. It's not like riding a bike. It's more like working out, in that if I'm not getting on stage all the time, my muscles are going to have atrophied and I just won't be able to do what I used to do. Like what you were saying, it's knowing the pauses. And to me, it's always like a feeling, because the pause is different in every room that you're in. So in some rooms I can pause for longer and then say the punchline and it'll just bomb. And in some rooms, like the longer the pause before I say the punchline, the better it'll do.
Yeah.
So it's such an in the moment, like visceral connection that right now I'm not on the level I was before Corona hit. Before Corona hit, I felt really good. I was headlining on the road a little bit, doing like one-nighters in New England. I was going to go to Baltimore. I was planning a trip down south. So I was like in Portland, Maine. I was going to do Boston a bunch. So it kind of sucks that this just hit, because I felt like I was getting to a place where I had like a 30-minute set that I was doing when I was headlining. And I was like, this is good. Like this, I have 30 minutes right now. And I know if I were to go back to doing that set, I would not have 30 minutes anymore, because it's just about like your connection with both the material and in the moment.
Yeah.
And how comfortable you are, and I wouldn't be comfortable at all.
It is amazing that happens, and like finding that out in yourself. Like I figured out how to be a little bit better at a stand up by hosting, because like I could riff and things like that. But then I also figured out that I would go up there, and I was so excited to like first time be a host that I'd be like, "What's up? Thanks for coming. Like we're so excited to have you. Here's the drink specials." And then I would go into my comedy, and it was a different person that was hosting.
Dude,
and then they were like,
"Oh yeah,
what happened to that guy?" You know, and you learn that, and you're like, "Oh shit, I can't come out and be like, hey, welcome to blah, blah, blah." You know, like I have
welcome to Wacky Packages. House of Chuckle Fuck.
Yeah, that's the. Hey, you like $2 Miller Lights? Because we got them. Like,
I've got Miller Lite coming out of my fucking eyes right now.
They're like,
I am
in the hospital.
Like, we love beer. We love a beer. Oh my God, my husband and I. This is my husband.
Make fun of us. Jared.
Me.
I'm wearing a fedora. I wore it on purpose. Make fun of me.
It's our anniversary, but we're a little worried because I had a miscarriage. All right. Oh God. Oh, we're gonna have to do some editing.
What? Keep that in, dude. Keep it in. That should be the only thing. Just you saying that over and over after I say my
for 2 hours.
Miscarriage might have something to do with the over drinking of Miller Lights, but yeah, whatever.
The theme. I was wondering, but Jamie, I think that an interesting thing talking to you and talking to Tyler is talking a little bit about competitive nature with your comedy. And I think it's interesting because I know that Tyler was someone who played sports for a while. Yeah. Were you ever someone who felt like you were a competitive person? And do you feel like it translates over into comedy if you were?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think that helps to be like a part of a sport before you do it. Not really the competitive aspect so much, but the commitment that a sport takes, like the daily practice. You know, you can't really take a day off if you want to, like Tyler did playing college. But I think the competitive aspect, I'm actually not really competitive with other comedians. I've never really felt that, but I love, I think what it is for me is it's like the comedians are one team. We're all on a team together against the audience. That's our competition. I always have felt like that. Because when you're on a show, right, you're not competing with the people you're performing with. You're fighting with the audience. And because when someone gets off stage and they come up to you and they're like, what the fuck's going on up there? And then you go up and you're like, oh shit, yeah, he was right. And then you get off, you're like, dude, yeah, you're right. They're tough today. It's not, you're not like competing with each other. You're always like fighting with the audience. And sometimes, you know, when it's a hot show, you're like, this crowd's fucking, they're so high. And you're like, yeah, this is so easy. I think it's not really competitive so much internally with other comedians. For me, at least, it's more competitive externally. It's like, it's always in that moment with that crowd. That's who you're competing with.
That is a great feeling too, when you do something and it bombs and then another comedian bombs and they like, you have that commiseration together where you're like, oh God, it wasn't just me. Yeah. I happened to me one time. It's one of my favorite moments ever in comedy. I bombed at the Raven Lounge. Somebody goes up, they bomb. Eddie Finn goes up and he bombs. I don't really understand like the whole room sucking at this point. I go up to Eddie and I'm like, man, I did really bad up there. And he takes a drink and looks at me and goes, are you in this room right now? I remember being like, oh wow, that felt so good to me.
Yeah, it does feel so good.
Man.
Yeah.
Those are the best moments, dude. The best moments are a terrible show where everyone's bombing. And like, I forget what, I think it was Usama Siddiqui. Do you know Usama Siddiqui? Have you heard of him?
No, I haven't.
He's just this great, one of the best.
Spell that to write it down.
He's kind of a mentor to me, but he's one of the best, hardest working, funniest comics in New York. And we were on a show together that was like, it was a full room and it was dog shit, right? It was terrible. And he goes up and he goes, I kind of like when this happens sometimes in certain cases where he's like, so you guys know you're wrong, right? Like they're all good comics. You're just dumb. He's just like,
shit.
I was like, whoa, oh my God.
Boy.
And it kind of got a laugh because they were like, I guess so. Like, they don't know. They're like, sure, I guess you're right.
Dude, that's so good. You know you're wrong. Oh my God.
It wasn't like mean. It was like he was like telling them. He's like, you guys, you know you're wrong, right? He's like trying to be helpful.
Speaking of that, we like. This is my favorite question, but it doesn't have to be you. Your brother also, when I asked him about if he's ever watched you bomb, he said he hasn't seen you bomb, which is like a pretty cool thing. But it doesn't have to be you. It could be anybody else. Your favorite bomb, like ever.
Oh, it doesn't have to be me.
It can be you. You could be your own favorite bomb, which would be great. But if you have somebody else,
love this fucking question.
Okay, my favorite bomb, and this is such a classic scenario for bombing. Only white guy. I'm in a black room. I'm in a black room. It's a mic where you get like 7 minutes, but this room they kind of like let you, if you're killing, like they let you go longer. So John Lasseter, great comedian. He's been on Comedy Central. He's like a regular at the Cellar, incredible comedian. Goes up before me, and he's killing so hard they let him do 30 minutes. They let him do 30, and he's like destroying. I was dying too. He's fucking hilarious. 30 minutes. The host goes up. He goes, John Lasseter, everyone. All right, we're gonna change up the pace now. And as he's saying this, the audience is coalescing. John walked to the back. The audience some of them stood up and they start walking towards John to be like, dude, that was the funniest thing I've ever seen. You're the fucking man. So there's only like 4 audience now because they're all congratulating John for having the best set ever. He goes, all right, we're going to change up the pace a little bit. This guy, he's never been here before, but he looks funny. Jamie Wolfe. And I go up and I do my first joke, which I think you've seen. It's about being Jewish, right? Mm-hmm. But looking, you know, like their natural predator. Mm-hmm. And I do the joke. And as soon as I say that line, it's weird because I'm Jewish, but, you know, I look like their natural predator. One woman, this black woman goes, oh, no. And then I did 7 minutes to silence. They didn't say "oh no" again. They just kind of stopped listening.
Oh God.
Oh,
Oh
that's
no.
awful. That's
Yeah, it's
That's
brutal.
horrible.
But it's so funny to like think back on that moment, because now if I were to be going up, I wouldn't care. I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna bomb. I know that. There's no way to follow what he just did. But back then I was like, maybe I could kill that hard. And then I go up to the first joke, and she goes, oh no.
That's the best. I love that. I love that response. I once
Yeah.
was hosting and I watched a guy drop like the hard F, and this lady just goes, it comes out of his mouth, and this lady goes, all right, and just that's my favorite person. All right, and just like
I once did really early on in doing stand up. I got the first paid gig I ever did was at Joe's Crab Shack in Delaware, and I went in. They said, we're not going to pay you unless you're funny. It was a sold out black room, wall to wall.
Okay.
And I mean, obviously you're doing like paper thin material after like a year of doing it.
Yeah.
And I'm doing material, and I'm like, I think, Aaron Carter's pretty fun, just material so obviously not for this room. And a woman right in front of me, like everybody's sitting on benches facing towards me eating dinner. And the woman right in front of me, I say something, it doesn't go well. I went, oh, okay. And she goes, it's all right, baby. And I was like, just openly weeping. I got paid I think they paid me with a plate of shrimp. That was all they were willing to give.
Oh, that's better than I thought. That means you were a little
right?
funny, I guess.
I get maybe, but I will never forget that wretched moment of having to be assured.
Yeah, exactly. Dude, those are the worst heckles, is when they're not even like heckling you. They're just kind of reacting honestly, but out
Try
loud.
to push you along.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, all right. It's like you can't really make fun of that.
Oh my God, no. Because they're on your team, technically.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
in a lot of ways, they're also fucking you up almost completely. I was wondering, because we were talking about that kind of a thing, like early on, did you have any other artistic influence, like something that you jumped into artistically that you feel like the philosophies of it carried over into what you do now? Like, did you ever have anything else that you were involved in?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I wasn't really a creative person before doing stand-up. Like I wrote a lot. I really liked short stories, and I loved Kurt Vonnegut, especially. Was one of my favorite writers when I was a teenager. I think a big thing that influenced me, and it's kind of weird, you wouldn't really think it, was like science fiction, reading science fiction books.
Interesting.
Yeah, because you read these books, and it's such an incredible experience to me, in that the creativity that goes into the people that think of these ideas that have never been thought of before is, to me, kind of what the best comedy is. It's like you take an idea that's like similar to something you've had, or similar to an idea that's in the world, but then you kind of twist it and you have your own point of view on it, and then it's like a new thought. That's what it feels like when it's at its greatest. It's that same level of just, it's a thought purely you have come up with. It's pure creation.
That to me, it's insane that like comedians don't get their just due of like, think about how many comedians are at an open mic. Dude, that's like 900 original jokes. You know what I mean? That people had to think of. Even if they're horrible, it's like 900 original ideas that people had to think of.
That's exactly right, dude. And I mean, some comedians I don't believe deserve their just due.
Name them.
Eliza Schlesinger that's not, I mean, that's the problem with bad comedy. Like the great comedians like Dave Chappelle, every time he says, he like verbalizes an idea, you're like, holy shit, that's exactly right, and I've never thought of it that way before. And like every joke he has like that. Elijah Schlesinger is the opposite, whereas everything she says is like, yes, I've experienced that and had that exact thought.
Yeah.
you're like, yeah, that's correct. There's no creativity. It's just like saying, it's like, when people get drunk, they go like, oh, isn't that crazy? It's like, nah,
Right.
not really.
But actually,
there's just a Geraldo thing where he was on the roast of Jeff Foxworthy. I used to like love roasts when I was younger, and he says to Jeff Foxworthy, he goes, "Man, in the '80s when everyone was doing corny observational humor, you really took a different path. You did it with a Southern accent." Holy shit, dude! Just destroyed his whole career. Is amazing.
Killed him.
Yeah.
Incredible.
It is interesting. So that is one of the questions often that we'll ask people is there like a theme in comedy or a type of comedy that if you could hold all the controls, play God for a second, and you could get rid of this one thing, is there a concept that you would like to knock off the map? Is it the comedy that you think people have thought of before? Do you think that that's immediately towards the bin?
Wow, that's such a good.
That gets your goat?
That's a really good question. How would you answer that? Is there something you would like to get rid of?
I was just on I was on another podcast and I talked about how much I wish that there was a seminar that everyone had to go to every year for how to behave while you're in an audience and you're a grown adult. Not talking and not adding your color commentary is so important to me. That's often how I think of it. But we're not interviewing me. We're interviewing you, Jamie. Tell us. Give us get into the weeds of it. We're ready for it. Don't worry.
That's such a good one. I think if I were to change one thing about comedy, if I were playing God, it would be, I think the biggest thing for me, I don't think the content of any comedy would I change. Like I wouldn't eliminate like observational humor or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think all of it is good when it's done well. But you see these people who have like the same tired takes on all the like men versus women.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, women have periods, or I don't know. Well, I don't really listen to that kind of comedy, but it's really shitty. It's like a shitty observation, and there's no point of view on that observation. But I wouldn't get rid of it. I think it's important to have that kind of crap comedy, because then when you see real comedy that's actually been thought out and is good, you know the difference. If there was only good comedy, there'd be no stick to measure against, right?
Right.
But when you see Elijah Schlesinger and then you see Chappelle, you're like, oh, he's really good. You can be bad at this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's like I know that I've always thought that about like and it was very much illustrated to me when I was little. I was very much into baseball, and we would talk about like. You watch a baseball game. Fuck off, Jared. I see your face.
I just regular Billy Crystal. Anyway.
I did. I love baseball, and that was the thing, was that you don't realize how good the best baseball players are until you go out and you play baseball. Until you get a pitch thrown at even 50 miles per hour right past you, and then you realize the leagues above you that you have to ascend and climb and that kind of a thing. I don't know, is that something you find to be a motivator for you? Like, was that a wow moment where you said there's so many other things to level up and into? Was that something that put the fire under your ass?
Yeah, you know what, really, that's a good question. I don't think that the level up was what put a fire under my ass. I mean, I do enjoy the improvement of comedy that comes with like just doing it every day and getting better, feeling yourself getting better, seeing the reactions that you're getting better. I think for me, the big thing was the big inspiration was watching a bit when I was like really deep in like, I did like a lot of Oxycontin and a lot of drugs when I was a teenager. And I saw Louis C.K. do a bit. At the time, I didn't know about the allegations. If I had known, I wouldn't have watched it. But he was doing this bit where he did, it was him getting really high, right?
Yeah.
And he, like a 9 to 10 minute story, I think, about just the experience of being really high. And at the time I was doing a lot of drugs, and it kind of felt like he had like reached into my life and taken a part of it out and just said it back to me. That's how like personal, but also true it felt. So I think that's what I want to do. I don't think there's really any bits I have yet that are that good. I mean, obviously, but I think that's what I'm aspiring to, is that like it's both personal and true and also hilarious.
Yeah, that's
Right.
yeah.
Interesting.
One of the first times I saw you, you did the bit about how you used to be have struggles with OxyContin, and my mother had her struggles with addictions and passed, and
Mm.
I have never bridged that gap in comedy where I talk about that. But like I've written so much stuff, but when I saw you do that and on stage, that was like, oh, this guy's like actually making light and fun and like bridging this gap in this way that it was awesome to me. I was like blown away. I was like, oh, he did it and he had people accept him. You know, like I think that's one of the coolest things in comedy is like if you see somebody, I'm not saying, rape or molestation is cool, but when someone does a joke like that and it works and a whole audience of every person laughs, you're like,
Yeah.
they got that. They
Dude,
did it. And it's
that's
like,
exactly right. Like that's the best to me, is like you take your pain, you make people laugh at it.
Yeah.
You take the power away. That you
Yeah.
just what
Yeah.
that event did to you is now it's bringing pleasure to others, and thus the catharsis for you. I have this friend in New York, Dylan Adler, one of the funniest comedian. He's like he does musical comedy. He's like kind of in the Bo Burnham mold. Like he does traditional stand up, and then we'll go to his piano and like back and forth. And he does a bit about how well, it's not. I was gonna say I don't know if I can say this, but he does a bit about it. He does a bit about getting like a song about when he was raped.
mhm.
And like going to therapy, and I like just saying that to you is it's not funny at all,
Yeah.
but he does it in such a funny way that afterwards you're just in awe of how you can take that much like trauma and pain and turn it into just like literally like belly laughing. This guy is so fucking funny. That's the beauty of comedy to me, and that's why I do it.
Yeah, one of my favorite Philly comics, Daryl Charles. Shout out Daryl Charles, one of the funniest guys. He did a joke about like I just sum it up, and it's like basically this little kid was rude to him, and then the kid was like, "I don't know you, you're a stranger," and he was like, "I wouldn't fuck that kid. I'd fuck a nicer kid." And then everyone in the room at Helium was like on the floor, and I was like, I remember stepping back and being like one of those moments like in a movie where you're like above your body. And I was like looking at the room and I was like, wow, everyone's laughing about raping a child right now. Like, this is pretty intense. Like, I don't know. It's a fucking amazing thing to do in comedy.
And it's weird, there's two groups in comedy. I really do feel like that. Like, there's the people who think it's okay to joke about that kind of stuff. And obviously what I think is like, I love making something that happened to me, like personal, funny, that also was traumatic. And I think that takes the power away from these scary things. But then there's the other group that's like, you can't ever joke about that.
Yeah.
Like OxyContin addiction, that's not fun. You can't joke about that. Like the Holocaust is not funny. You can't joke about that. And I've never been a part of that group, but that is a group that exists. There's a bunch of people who really do believe that. And it's not better to think one way or the other, but and all people are complaining now, like you can't joke about anything. You can't, everyone's so sensitive, where I don't think it's true. I think everyone's as sensitive as they've always been, and you can still joke about whatever you want. It's just like Twitter magnifies their
right. Yeah. But it's also, is it funny?
Yeah. True. That
is the joke
I think
funny?
that is a big consideration.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem. It's comedy. Some jokes naturally, if they're about pedophilia, people will think they're offensive, even if the joke is funny to other people. Like it's hard to decide. Some people are just like, it doesn't matter what the joke is or how funny it is. You just can't joke about that.
Yeah. And they also, it's weird that people think that like someone thinks a subject is funny. Like that joke is funny about that subject. You don't think rape is funny.
Right.
That joke in containing that subject. I don't know. Yeah. Exactly. I don't know why I said I don't know. I know. I just explained it.
I think it is. I was going to ask Jamie, though, because your things, in reviewing some of your tapes, that you are someone who is very comfortable with this sort of element of your own personal struggles, the things that you've been through before. Did you ever have a time where you couldn't subscribe to that? Like early on, were you going up and not able to do things about your struggles with addiction, things like that?
Yeah, yes. So the bit that was in Philly's Funniest that is now it's one of my main bits. I think it's one of my better bits I've ever written, is about OxyContin. And I was doing that bit on stage for probably like a year, and it was obviously a different iteration. I tried to talk about OxyContin on stage for like a year, and it never ever worked. Like I don't know, I wasn't good enough. The joke wasn't there yet. It just never once got a laugh. And then like a year in, I tried it a little differently. It got like a little bit, but it still wasn't there. And literally for about that year, not every set, but I would just go in and out of just working on that bit. Just like, how do I fucking make this work? It took forever. And now it took 2 years, and now I have a minute and a half on that. It took 2 years to get 1 minute and a half. So that's the hardest stuff to make good. But when I do, I feel like this incredible sense of accomplishment, and also like that's, I feel like that's what I want to do my whole life, is make stuff that's awful that happened to me funny.
Can I also then ask you something a little bit more specific? Is that I was at the Philly's Funniest competition. I was at the finals when you won, and I remember you have a joke that you do where you do. I mean, it's not about something personal, but it is about something that is traumatic. It is that you do a joke where you do the Mickey Mouse impersonation, but talking about, eventually it jumps into the Israel-Palestine conflict and things like that. And it was interesting because I think I had talked to you afterwards. I don't remember where we were, but we talked about, you got off stage and someone said to you, "That's not funny. That's not like, you shouldn't be joking about that." But I really do want to ask you, is that your realm? Is that the type of comedy that you want to live in? Is living within that? It's not I don't want it to be taken as a criticism, but I do want to ask, like, is that something where you think that that's the sacrifice that you're making for this joke? Or is that the moment where you're saying that, like, does that steer you onto a different path in some way?
It's a really good question. There's a lot there. I think, one, to answer the first part of that question.
I was going to say, let's talk about the instance itself. Can we talk about that first?
Itself. Yeah, I thought that was funny because the joke is making fun of Jewish people, and it was Palestinians who got offended. So they clearly didn't understand what the joke was. I'm also saying these things in a Mickey Mouse voice. So the idea that anyone would be offended by that is in itself funny. Because I'm going, whoo-hoo, I mean, the Palestinians, they're terrorists, whoo-hoo. And it's funny that someone would hear that and go, what the fuck did he just say? Like, they'd get like all angry about a joke I made in a Mickey Mouse voice. So that specific instance, I could laugh off, but there's sometimes when someone will, like, they'll be like, I don't think you can make that race joke. And I'll think about it and I'll be like, yeah, you're probably right. That's probably not my place to make that joke. It's just, you got to hear the criticism. If it's valid, you got to take it. You can't be like, no. You can't just write off valid criticism. But you can also think about what they're saying and be like, okay, she's offended because she's Palestinian, and I was doing a Mickey Mouse voice that was making fun of Jewish people. So I don't think her criticism made any sense. But
I think that's when you can use the line, like, she's like, "That's not funny," and you're like, "Were you in this room?" Like, it obviously was funny.
Yeah, you're right.
Like, I'm not saying one person's opinion doesn't matter, but if 500 or 499 people think it's funny and one person doesn't, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I don't know that lady really just like came up to you and said that.
She was like yelling. Her and her friend, they were like, "You can't joke about that." He called my people terrorists, and I think it was Ben who was managing Helium at the time. He had to like escort them out because they were like, "He called my people terrorists," and I was like, I was, as Mickey Mouse, as a Jewish Mickey Mouse, I called your people terrorists, and you're mad. So, but you're right. I mean, you can't invalidate their experience, but it's wrong.
It's funny you're doing it in a Mickey Mouse voice, and you still have to be like, it's a character piece. Like, what else
I
would
know.
it be, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, man.
But to answer the other part of your question, Dave, I do think that's where I live. I don't even try to write material that's about like these real raw subjects, but for some reason that's what my brain comes up with. Like, I'm not interested in doing any like Jerry Seinfeld, like observation, like pithy observational. I want more like real raw observational. I think obviously the best comedian of all time, Richard Pryor, he did that the best. But and that's what that's what I want to aspire to.
Who's your Rushmore then? Since we're here, who's your like top? We'll just do top 3. I mean, you don't need to do top 4, but
yeah. It's hard because I think for me it's different because my favorite stand-up versus the best of all time I actually think is a different list.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Both.
Okay, I think the top 3 Pryor by a lot. Number 1, Chappelle, and then for me it's Louis. I think like best stand-up comedians ever. Not anymore, but before. And then the top 3 of people who I think are like make me laugh the most personally are Maria Bamford, Nate Bargatze, and Pryor. So it's quite a different list, I think, because
very interesting.
That's really
good.
That is a good list. It has your changed like as you get older. Has it drastically changed at all, or is it just a little bit?
Yeah, it changes a lot. I think maybe it's getting older, but it's also for me, it's like getting more into comedy. I recognize the genius of some people that I didn't see before. Like Pryor, when I watched him when I was like 12, I was like, what is this? This is like hack, like black versus white people jokes. And then I watch it now and I'm like, he literally invented that style of comedy. No one did that until Pryor did.
Yeah.
He invented a whole new, and everyone, even now, almost everyone is still copying that style. And it was like 40, 50 years ago almost.
He does the how white people get upset and he's like, listen, peckerhead. He does that bit, which is one of my favorites. Yeah. And then there's a Steve Harvey bit where he does how white people get fired. And I was like, we got from there to this one. Yeah. And it's like, but I think the Steve Harvey bit is great because he just goes, for crying out loud, for Pete's sake, like that stuff. And it's like, but if Pryor didn't start that, so as you're saying, like that all evolved from that. So I just also think that the white guy voice is like by a black person is the funniest thing.
So funny. I hate how funny. It's always funny. It doesn't even have to be like a good joke. Just the voice alone is funny.
The Chip impression.
Wait, I was interested. Who's your top 3?
Jared, you want to
and best.
David, come first.
My top 3? Oh God. You know what's interesting is the other day I got back, like when 2020 hit, I got my top like artists of all time or whatever. Patton Oswalt was my number 1, but I mean, I did switch accounts in the middle of like 2017, but Patton Oswalt I think is like one of the best writers there is. I also think that he's someone who keeps consciously so aware of everything and is constantly like, I would say that listening to very early Oswald and listening to very new Oswald shows a lot of his adaptability points.
Yes.
True. And I think that with that shows incredible strength of him, and then also just mental fortitude wise and his ability to, sort of move ahead. He's definitely on it. I would say that it's interesting because I think Louis was a huge influence of mine, but with recent things, it's just been, I feel like it's really complicated a relationship with him. I think that it's, I don't know if he's on there, but I feel like I definitely have to acknowledge how much he did influence me. And then probably Pryor. But that was just sort of, I think that there's, like you said, there's the best comedians, and then there's the ones that influence you. And I think that there's also, I would probably put a whole other category of watershed comedians.
Yeah.
The ones that got in your head and opened you up to a whole new room.
True.
The whole thing.
Who was that for you? Was that Pryor? Are you saying, or?
Probably. I got that N-words crazy when I was like 12. I think I bought it at a record shop near my house when I was 12. And you know what it is? Is that I feel like there's this world of independent comics right now, and there's this world of like stand-ups. But I think that it's interesting when you listen to things like Richard Pryor doing his bit about The Exorcist and Dracula. I think that if you brought him to 2020 and he did those jokes, he would kill in an independent room just the same as he did, you know, playing with, you know, Tina Turner and shit like that. I think that that is what was amazed me, was that the A side of those tracks is very much about I have these things, I have views on race, but then he goes into the everyday and he's still, I mean, he's still fucking golden, definitely. And then maybe Bamford. Bamford every time is like a fucking spellbinding. I've seen her twice and she was amazing both times. Yeah. Sat front row at Helium in Philly the first time just by myself. And she just, I mean, she's just, as a comedian ages, I feel like they come into this moment of comfort. And I would actually be interested to ask you, who do you think is the most comfortable comedian that you've seen on stage? But she's definitely one of mine. She just sits in it and she knows it so well in that moment and just moves forward and ahead and into it. Do you have anybody like that?
Yeah, that's so good. I think the one person who I could describe that way, and that was a very apt description for like someone who's mastered just being on stage. Not even just the comedy aspect of it, but like literally that performance part. I think for me was I just forgot. Oh, Mike Birbiglia. I don't know why I forgot his name. Mike Birbiglia is like, he's like that, where it's all, you can tell. And I saw him early on in his career, and he was just like a good joke writer. He's a funny guy, you know. It's like a dime a dozen. There's a lot of people like that, but then he just transformed into this like masterful like storyteller, comedian. I mean, when you see him live, it's like he's literally like controlling the audience. It's incredible to watch.
Yeah, he's a very, very good comedian. I do like Mike Birbiglia a lot.
All right, Jared, what's yours?
Yeah.
Dude, mine's like how David's is. Like I have this whole like web, but seriously, because it's like where I am now. But like, so for top three would be Seinfeld unapologetically, because I separate man from art. Louis, and then Chappelle. Those are three stand-ups that I think shaped stand-up to where it is today and how good stand-up is today. Seinfeld because of the show when I was a kid. Louis because that Shoot Up special was like amazing. And Chappelle because he's never really missed for me. Like he doesn't miss. I think Chappelle's, I guess, more squeaky than Seinfeld. Like, you know what I mean? Like he doesn't miss, you know, so then when I started, I was like really like Seinfeld and Mulaney I liked, but then I really like turned into like Holmes and Rory Scovel were my favorites. Like I really liked comedy because I didn't want to be the guy who's like, you know, like, oh, man, you Ziploc bags, right? You know what I mean? Because that's what Jerry Seinfeld does. And you're like, you know, so I watched Rory Scovel and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like you can be animated, this and that. And then as I started like really figure it out, I really like I liked Normand and Sam Morril for like, I like their joke writing a lot. I like the way that they did it. And I was like really inspired by them. But now I'm at the point where I really like Joe List and I like Dan Soder. I like their comedy. It's like those jokes that like Morril and Normand do are there, but it's like a longer form. You feel like more comfortable. Yeah. You know, like when you watch Morril and you watch Normand, they're amazing. I love them. But there's times where you're like, this is stand-up comedy. But with like, for me, like Soder and List, I'm like, he's kind of just talking to me. I really like that aspect of that. Like sort of, I don't know.
That's so true. I feel like that's really what great stand-up is there's a lot of elements. There's like writing, there's stage presence, connection. There's all of these different things. And the best comics like Chappelle or Pryor, they just do those things naturally, or not naturally, but after years of practicing, but they do them and it feels like both incredible jokes and it's like very conversational and there's a good connection. But then there's other comics who have like one element. Like I would say Mark Normand, one of the best joke writers ever, probably the best joke writer in doing comedy right now, but there's just something missing, you know? There's like, there's some human element that it's like clearly rehearsed stand-up comedy.
Yeah, and that's where I like feel like I'm at now, and like I know like getting past that is like where I want to be. So like having those goals for yourself and having like, so people are always like, I'm super inspired by, but I feel like it's an aesthetic that you're like inspired by, like the way someone does something that you kind of want to change, sort of deal. And like, I don't know, but I don't know if you've interacted with List or Soder, but like just I don't know. I've only ever seen them. I actually haven't seen them live. I did see Seinfeld live. I did see Chappelle live. One of the weirdest comics I ever saw live who was amazing was Richard Lewis, if you guys know him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He's so good.
Dude, it was just like you were just in a room with a crazy person, like a
Oh, yeah.
back and forth. That was pretty amazing. But I do want to give you a compliment, though, Jamie. In the last couple years of comedy, I've heard a lot of jokes, and like so many of David is so funny to me. Just David in general is like, I've talked about this before, but one of my favorite things is David once came up to me and he goes, do you remember Five Gum? I remember that being like the funniest thing I'd ever heard in my life. I remember dead, like I was saying it on the walk home. I like, did a mic and I was like, did that set go good? Do you remember Five Gum? I was like, that's funny. Like, maybe that should be the joke. But you have a joke, and I think it's different in one set, but I saw you do it, and you say, guy who is underwhelmed at everything or underreacts to everything.
Yeah.
And the first time I saw you do it, you were like, he finds out about the Holocaust. And then I think you said Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor, yeah.
And when you did the Holocaust one, it hit just as much as the Pearl Harbor. But I remember being in that audience and being that guy that, like, when you hear an audience and someone's like, ah! Like their laugh is uncontrolled, and you're like, what the fuck's wrong with that guy? That was my laugh at that joke. So I don't know. That was one of my favorites.
That's so sweet, man.
Well, I was going to ask, because we are getting towards the end here, and this might be a big question. I know that not to get towards the element of imitation, but is there one comedian that you think, when we're talking about ascending these levels of comedy, do you think that there's one comedian that you would like to start to grab another skill from? Like, if you could have Pryor's observational knowledge, if you could have Joe List's stage presence, if you could have Maria Bamford's knowledge of the obscure, where do you think is your next field marker that you've set ahead?
Yeah.
And what is it that you want to attain next?
Kurt, what a good question. And I've thought about this a lot. And I know what I want to do moving forward, which is like, I want to be a Mulaney's ability to tell a story is what I want. But I want to co-opt it for more irreverent stories. Like Mulaney does it about, like, the Salt and Pepper Diner one is one of the best stories ever done in stand-up.
Absolutely.
Almost a perfect story. Every line's either a setup or a punch. It builds to the end, and there's a huge crescendo. I think I would like to do that form of storytelling, but like for an irreverent thing, like, drug use, a story of me doing drugs, stories about race, things that are like real to me that I think are like actually personal. Because Mulaney is the best storyteller in comedy today, but I don't think he hits the rawness that I want to hit. So that's exactly what I would take, his ability to tell a story.
That's
wow.
Yeah, that's an amazing point in like the way that you said that, because I think Mulaney does the same thing as the show Seinfeld did, where it was like yada yada. There's something to pull from it. That's so amazing. I remember that last special came out and someone was like, did you see that last Mulaney special? I was like, yeah. And they're like, J.G. Bittenbinder. And I was like, that wasn't even the joke. Like that was
you're right.
Not even the full credit.
So, yeah, I think that's an amazing one to pick, dude. That was great.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I suppose that we're in the wrap up here. Jamie, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us. And we really loved having you. You were a fantastic guest.
You guys are the fucking best.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you. This was really fun. What a good conversation.
Thank you, and
Good.
thanks for coming. We'll catch you next time on So Tell Us.
Oh yeah, really
Yeah.
appreciate it, guys.